We're going to continue our study in the Proverbs, chapters 15, 16, 17, 18, and 19, as we just make our way on through here in maybe the next 25 minutes or less. So you can open up your Bibles to Proverbs 15. That is where we resume our study through the Proverbs. No, we will not be covering the entirety of chapter 15 today, but we will take a look at a handful of verses as we go through this. And so, you guys ready? Yes. All right, Proverbs 15, verse 1, a wonderful truth. A soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. We'll just read verse 2 as well. The tongue of the wise uses knowledge rightly, but the mouth of fools pours forth foolishness. As we go through chapter 15, we will see a variety of verses that are kind of connected together. In my Bible, verses 1 and 2 don't even have like the paragraph break between them. That's not inspired or the Lord. It's just kind of they recognize there's a consistent theme here. These two verses may be intended to be one proverb, but we're going to kind of look at them as two, running through the consistent theme of our words, of what we do, how we use our tongue and our words. And so in verse 1 where it says, a soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. This hits on that matter, and again, we're seeing a great deal of repetition as we're here, not quite, well, I guess we are halfway through our Proverbs, aren't we? Last week would have been the halfway point. No, we're not halfway through yet. We'll make it after this chapter, we'll be halfway through. But we've seen this consistency of themes, and one of them really hits on our words, of how we use our words. And one of the things that I love as we're going through the Proverbs is there's an element of equipping the saints to understand what God gave you a tongue for, what he gave you your lips for, what he gave you your vocabulary and even this gift of communication for, and how we're to use it. Of course, the Proverbs are all presented as this is what wisdom says. And so in the biggest, most general sense, the Proverbs are intended to teach or impart wisdom, or in the very least identify what is wise and what is not. And so oftentimes we find that contrast between the wise and the fool. Well, here we're giving this wisdom, this insight concerning our words, and that is that a soft answer turns away wrath. This is a matter of self-control, and it's both a matter of the control of our lips, of our words, of what comes out of our mouth, but because from the heart the mouth speaks, we realize that it's not just self-control over our tongue, but it's truly self-control over our emotions, specifically in this context. And so a soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word, it'll stir up anger. There is such great wisdom. If you just take this one proverb and you just walked away this week with just this one application, that a soft, think self-controlled, thought-out response to that person or circumstance that is filled with rage, you realize, wow, like there's phenomenal application here. But this application is absolutely contrary to what our sinful nature would do. Our pride, our flesh, we would respond in the second half of this verse, meaning that when someone has given us a harsh word, when someone's anger has been set before us and we're the object of their wrath, our tendency in our flesh is to respond with a harsh response. When someone is angry at us, typically even before they've finished what's coming out of their mouth, it's welling up within us. You know what I mean? And we're getting angry because of what they're saying to us or about us. Sometimes it's not even about us. It's just their tone. It's just the fact that like there's flesh in the room. You know what I mean? And it's kind of like, I don't know, it's like, one of the principles I've learned is that flesh begets flesh, that when someone is in sin, we easily are ensnared and we get wrapped up in their sin. And so when they're being proud, well, it brings out from within me a proud response. You can't say that to me. And so we respond and we kind of want to outdo them. We want to outmeasure them. We want to give a little bit more of a more wrathful response. But when we come back to God's wisdom, where it says a soft answer turns away wrath, this is like the one biblical proverb, if you will. It's the most concise truth of de-escalation. Flesh begets flesh. Everything escalates. But de-escalation is when an individual is able to walk into the conversation and just kind of, everything gets calmed down. It's kind of like, oh. You'll know people who have the gift for this, like they can, there's two people and they're just going at it. And of course, a wise person probably doesn't insert themselves in the middle of it. It's kind of like trying to separate a dogfight or something. You know what I mean? It's like, just let them work it out. But that de-escalator, they can walk in and they can begin to calm things down to where actually logic can begin to function again, as opposed to just the anger and the wrath, the emotion that's been poured forth. And so again, that soft answer is that self-controlled answer. It's that well-thought-out answer. This verse hits on that consistent theme that we began to see last week. We'll see it again today. We'll see it again as we continue through chapter 15 and probably all the way through the Proverbs, and that is the wisdom of working out a wise response as opposed to a not so well thought out reaction. And so the difference between a response and a reaction is the difference in this context of a soft answer that actually is fruitful and productive, as opposed to a harsh answer which just brings forth more rage. One is bringing a cool, calming balm to something that's inflamed, and the other one's just pouring fuel on the fire. It's that difference, it's that distinction that is made there. But phenomenal, phenomenal wisdom here in this opening verse of chapter 15. It goes on concerning our words in verse 2. It says, the tongue of the wise uses knowledge rightly, but the mouth of fools pours forth foolishness. That pouring forth is a great use of the language there, because it's literally, just think about literally of pouring something out of a bucket. It's pouring it out. And so the mouth of fools just continues to pour out even more foolishness. But the first half of that, where it says the tongue of the wise uses knowledge rightly, again, phenomenal piece of wisdom for us here, because we oftentimes will gain, I'll say, information. And we should probably point out that oftentimes in the Proverbs, when we come across the word knowledge, it's not so much referring to information as it's referring to more of understanding or wisdom. Okay? And so just kind of keep that in the back of your mind when you come across the word, understanding or knowledge. It's kind of understanding of what is wise, knowledge of what is wise, of kind of how do you handle this type of a situation. But so the tongue of the wise uses knowledge rightly. And there is this element that we might have truth in our mind, but that doesn't mean that we're necessarily using that truth wisely. And so the tongue of the wise, they know how to use knowledge, and they know how to use it wisely. It's knowing what to say. It's knowing how to say what that is. The delivery is a huge part of it. It's knowing to whom to say it. There's some things that just some people don't need to know. And it also includes knowing when not to say anything at all. And so having that wisdom, that understanding, that knowledge, and then using that rightly. If you think about just the sin of gossip, that is using, we'll say, knowledge, or at least information, the knowledge of someone or a circumstance, and using it in a perfectly sinful fashion, right? Because there's no wisdom in gossiping about another person. That sin of gossip reveals that the gossiper has absolutely no fear of God, and they have no regard for man. And oftentimes gossip is just birthed out of a desire to exalt self. And at the very root of it, it's just the exaltation of self by saying, I know something that you don't know. We never say it that way. But that's really what's at the heart of it. And we might disguise it. We might try to spiritualize it. We might try to say, there's something you really should be aware of. And, when the person finishes sharing what it is, a wise person would probably go, and why did you think that I needed to know that? Like, that doesn't mean anything to me. I don't need that information. That doesn't protect me. It doesn't protect them. All you're doing is spreading information that is destroying this individual. And so knowing how to use that knowledge rightly, the wise understands that. As we move on in to verse 3, it says, the eyes of the Lord are in every place, keeping watch on the evil and the good. Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. I had a quote for you from our first two verses. I skipped my notes, sorry. Okay, so here's from Reverend Charles Bridges. He was a minister in England in the early to mid 1800s. And he says this, he says, man's natural inclination is to give in to irritation, to justify oneself, and to insist on having the last word. In an argument, neither party is prepared to give an inch. Pride and passion on both sides strike together like two flints. We indulge in sarcasm as if we would rather lose a friend than miss scoring a point in the argument. Oh, isn't that great? I mean, no, it's not great. I mean, isn't that a great way of communicating that? You know, like he hits on the fact that sometimes our words will be poured out with no regard for the consequences or for the disaster that's going to unfold, for the devastation that we're going to inflict. But it's just simply because I've got this information, or sometimes it's not even the information, it's just the battle of the wills battling. But again, that soft answer is really humility at work. Because humility says, I don't need to win. I just want the Lord to win. Humility says, I don't need to win. I want our relationship to win. And so humility will always prefer the other, which is why that soft answer is not the answer that typically wins the argument, but we would say that it does win the day in regards to winning the relationship. So again, coming back to verse 3, verse 3 really is kind of bringing us into the issue of God's omniscience. It says that the eyes of the Lord are in every place, keeping watch on the evil and the good. And so here's the Lord, and I love the way that this is phrased, because oftentimes God's all-knowing omniscience can kind of fall into the category of a doctrine that we know is true, but that we don't really embrace to the point of living it out or living in the reality of it. I mean, I think every born-again believer who understands the Bible understands that God knows everything. And in fact, I think even people who don't know the Bible understand and believe that God knows everything, but very few people live their lives as though God knows everything, right? And so, again, the doctrine of God's omniscience is one that's easy to kind of just slip into the put on the shelf of, yes, there's true doctrine, but it doesn't really make it into application. But when this truth of God's knowledge, of his awareness, when that makes it into truly the core of our belief, that we begin to live in the reality that God knows, that God sees, that nothing escapes his attention, well, obviously that should bring about a sense of accountability, right? For us personally, there should be a greater sense of accountability, because I understand, man, you're like, the Lord knows. The eyes of the Lord are in every place, keeping watch on the evil and on the good. And I think most of us would say, well, I'm falling to the latter part of that one. You know, he's keeping an eye on the good. That's me. Because who ever puts themselves into the category of the evil? You know? Well, yeah, the Lord's watching the evil as well. I guess he's keeping an eye on me. But so for the saints, it does bring a greater sense of accountability. But it also, when we even just think about the fact that he is searching, you know, like his eyes are keeping watch. This is an active searching out, that there's no hidden place. There's no nook or cranny where someone's hiding, doing evil that God's not aware of. As the saints, when we are living in the reality that God is on the lookout, that he's aware, that he knows the evil that is taking place in our day, first of all, that means that he knows truly the evil that's taking place in our day, as opposed to our limited understanding of the evil that's taking place in our day. I don't know too many believers who are under the impression that evil is not on the rise in our day, okay? Evil's always been, evil will continue to be until the Prince of Peace returns and conquers it, okay? And so evil is nothing new, but we do kind of see the ebb and flow of evil throughout different societies and different points in history. It never disappears. It's just a matter of really whether it's on the decline or whether it's on the rise. And so most believers that I know today are under the impression that, yeah, evil is like spreading, you know, like specifically in society and in culture, that is just kind of ramping up. But if we understand that God sees it all, and we don't, okay, that should give us a sense of, There should in that be a sense of there's a peace and a calm. And I know for myself, when I get wrapped up in making some discovery of really how deep and dark a certain manifestation or practice of evil is, okay? For example, we all understand that human trafficking is a reality. We all understand that there are young children that are abducted and are put into, sex slavery, okay? We understand that there are grown adults in our society who are abducted and trafficked humanly, or humanly trafficked. We understand these things, right? We're aware of it. But if you get into the inner workings of it, and I'm not saying that you're like part of the industry, I'm just saying like if you were to partner with a human trafficking ministry and you began to understand how these things worked, you began to understand how prolific it is, how many victims there are, that there is a whole industry within our own country that operates on this thing, you would be disgusted, you would be infuriated. And you'd be talking to your cousin at Thanksgiving who goes, "Oh, I'm sure that sort of stuff happens." But you'd be like, "You don't understand the reality of it, right?" It's like you're in it, you get it. Well, God gets it even more. Like even that person that's into it and into it deep, they see it, and they see it deeper and more accurately than maybe the average churchgoer might understand it or perceive it. But even that person who's actively involved in it, they're not there. They're not with every child. They're not watching every victim be victimized. But the Lord's eyes, they search out. Now this brings us, there's kind of an implication to this, or another biblical truth that I think is important to tie in, and that is that God is not content to allow injustice to prevail. That is to say, that God searches out the good and the evil. And his conclusion at the end of the day isn't that he doesn't care. He cares more than any human being could ever care. And so for those of us who are just sitting here looking at this proverb, looking at this truth, that the eyes of the Lord are in every place keeping watch on the good and the evil, okay? That we then understand that he knows and that he is involved even if we don't see the ways he is working. But then we tie in our understanding of God's sovereignty, that God is in control. That is to say that he is working something bigger than we can comprehend. That is that his ways are above our ways. His understanding is beyond our perception. So we don't know what God knows. We don't see what God sees. And we don't even see what God is doing, but we are called to walk by faith, trusting that as God sees and as God knows, so also does God do. And so faith comes in, and that's where we no longer rely upon our own sight, but rather we recognize that the Lord's sight is fixed. He is scanning. Remember that scene in The Lord of the Rings? The Dark Tower, the all-seeing eye. It's like continually scanning. Are you guys with me? You can see the scene? Those Frodo and Sam, and they're ducking behind a rock as it's starting to zoom in on them, right? If you guys don't know the scene, just go home and start watching. Just watch the whole trilogy tonight. Just binge on it for a while. But I mean, it's that scene, but except that eye is not all-seeing. It's not all-knowing. But our God is. And that should lay the foundation for peace, even when we're looking into the face of evil. Because we're not looking at anything that God doesn't see a whole lot better. We continue on into verse 4. It comes back to our words again in a slightly different sense. It says, "A wholesome tongue is a tree of life, but perverseness in it breaks the spirit." That is, a perverse tongue breaks the spirit, whereas a wholesome tongue is a tree of life. Now, the tree of life is always the picture of a tree that gives life. It's the idea, if you will. I mean, you could go back to even the Garden of Eden, to the tree of life, which is there portrayed as anyone who partakes of its fruit would have eternal life, that they would live forever. And so its fruit is life-giving. And so a wholesome tongue is to be life-giving. That's not to say that I can speak words to you, and as I speak them that you're going to live forever. I mean, I can speak to you the words that will tell you the truth of eternal life. I can share the gospel with you, right? Those would be the best, most wholesome words we could ever share. But this, in the more general sense, is hitting on that consistent theme we've seen, which is kind of summarized at the end of Ephesians 4, and that is that our words are to be building people up, not tearing them down. A fool can tear anyone down. And kind of a battle of wits, whereby they try to tear each other down more effectively, would really just be a battle of fools in that regard. But the wise recognize, no, that's not why God gave me this tongue. In James' epistle in the New Testament, he gives phenomenal warnings about the power of the tongue and the great damage that it can inflict. But we are told here that a wholesome tongue will build up. It will impart life. It'll give hope. Or even as Paul says to the Ephesians, that our words are to impart grace to those who are hearing them. In verse 5, it says, a fool despises his father's instruction, but he who receives correction is prudent. Man, we have seen this thing like 100 times already in our study of the Proverbs, right? It hits on that consistent theme of the individual who doesn't receive instruction. We also see it phrased and presented as the individual who won't receive correction or discipline. And when we look at this, again, it says, a fool despises his father's instruction, but he who receives correction is prudent. And, it's difficult to admit when we're wrong. I think that's a phrase that we're all familiar with. It's a principle and a reality that we're all familiar with. It's not typically all that easy to admit when we've been wrong, because admitting when we're wrong does require humility. And when you come across a person who is really great at admitting that they're wrong, they're either a real loser or they're phenomenally humble. Okay? I probably shouldn't have said that first part, huh? But when you see someone who graciously just can receive correction and instruction, you realize that's humility being manifested before you. And if you're the person correcting someone and you're seeing that humble response, continue doing what is necessary by way of giving the instruction and the correction. But please, leave that conversation with a phenomenal regard for that person, because you have just encountered a very wise person, regardless of what error they may have made, what mistake they had, what wrong perception they had. The humility alone speaks volumes of their character and of their ability. And so it's difficult for us to admit when we're wrong. It requires humility. But I think that it is even more difficult to admit when we're a fool. We can say that it's hard to admit when you're wrong, and we all go, oh, yep, that's true. It's almost like it's kind of like a phrase that we all know. Yep, it's hard to admit when you're wrong, but no one really talks about admitting when you're a fool. And oftentimes in our study of the Proverbs, we kind of look at wisdom and folly. We look at the wise and the fool, and we kind of put them into two categories. Like, well, there's two kinds of people in the world. There's the wise and then there's the fool. Okay? Like, these are the two types of people they are. But when we come to this and we realize, wow, you know what, we might be willing to recognize when we're wrong or done wrong, but we really don't want to recognize when we've been a fool. But yet, what do the Proverbs say? It's, well, a fool refuses instruction and despises it. We see a variety of Proverbs throughout this book that talk about the fool. And if somehow you make it through our entire time in the Proverbs without at least one, if not 100 Proverbs speaking to you and convicting you that you might just be a fool, if you can make it through the study of the Proverbs without being convicted and convinced, at least on one occasion, that you're a fool, then let me just tell you right now, you missed it and you're a fool. Okay? Right? But I honestly believe that the Proverbs are not set forth just for us to be able to identify the fools around us, but they're set before us so that we can identify the fool within us. That's what it's for. I've got so much wisdom I can identify a fool from a mile away. Okay. the Proverbs are a bit more deeper than that. You know, they penetrate more than that, and we should be open and receptive. So that when we look at a verse even like this, and we think, well, yeah, I have a hard time receiving instruction. I don't like to be corrected. We can all say that. But even though all of us can say that, few of us can say, and I'm a fool for being such. But when you come to that threshold of being willing to recognize, I'm a fool, which is no different than coming to the same threshold of being willing to recognize, I'm a sinner. When you're willing to come to that place, then you stand at the beginning of wisdom. You might say, so which am I? Am I a fool or am I wise? Because I'm a little confused right now. And I'll tell you, we're all fools. The question is, who's on the road to wisdom? And the answer will be the humble are on the road to wisdom.